What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars goes head-to-head with late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Tom Cruise sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a promotional appearance that turned into an absolute disaster. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a full-blown confrontation that had the entire studio audience gasping and social media exploding within minutes. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other, with the host delivering his opening monologue to the packed studio audience. But what nobody expected was that by the end of the show, one of the most respected actors in Hollywood would be storming off the set in complete fury, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would send shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Tom Cruise had arrived at the studio that evening with his usual professional demeanor, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit and appearing every bit the movie star he's been for over 4 decades. The Mission Impossible star was there to promote his latest film, and everything seemed perfectly normal as he made his way through the backstage corridors, greeting crew members with his trademark smile and infectious energy. But Jimmy Kimmel had other plans for the evening. Sources close to the production revealed that the host had been preparing for this interview differently than usual, spending considerable time researching not just Cruise's new movie, but diving deep into the more controversial aspects of the actor's personal life and beliefs. The warning signs were there from the very beginning, but nobody could have predicted just how explosive things would become. As the show's familiar theme music played and Kimmel took the stage, there was an unusual tension in the air. The host's opening monologue seemed more pointed than usual, with several jokes that seemed to be laying groundwork for what was about to come. He made subtle references to Hollywood's relationship with certain religious organizations, comments that would prove to be ominous foreshadowing for the disaster that was about to unfold. When it came time to introduce his guest, Kimmel's smile seemed forced, almost predatory. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the biggest movie stars in the world, Tom Cruise. The audience erupted in applause as the actor emerged from behind the curtain, waving enthusiastically and displaying none of the apprehension that perhaps he should have felt. The two men shook hands at center stage, but even in that brief moment, viewers at home could sense something was off. Kimmel's grip lingered just a beat too long, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. Cruise, ever the professional, maintained his composure as they walked toward the interview chairs, but there was a slight stiffness in his movements that suggested he might have sensed the ambush that was coming. The first few minutes of the interview proceeded normally enough. Kimmel asked about the new Mission Impossible film, and Cruise responded with his typical enthusiasm, discussing the death-defying stunts he'd performed and the incredible dedication of his cast and crew. His passion for his craft was evident, as he described hanging off the side of a moving airplane and performing motorcycle jumps that would terrify most professional stuntmen. But then Kimmel began to steer the conversation in a different direction. You know, Tom, you're famous for doing your own stunts, for this incredible dedication to authenticity in your films. But I'm curious about authenticity in other areas of your life. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun, and Cruise's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. Well, Jimmy, I think authenticity is important in everything we do. When I make a movie, I want audiences to feel like they're experiencing something real, something that matters. Cruise's response was measured, professional, but there was a new wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there moments before. Kimmel leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. That's interesting, because there are some people who might question the authenticity of certain beliefs, certain organizations that some celebrities choose to support. Don't you think public figures have a responsibility to be transparent about the things they promote? The studio audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the lighthearted celebrity banter they'd expected. Cruise's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in as he attempted to deflect. I think everyone has the right to their own beliefs, Jimmy. That's what makes this country great. I'm here to talk about my movie, about the incredible work my team has done. But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, the host seemed energized by Cruise's discomfort, like a predator sensing weakness in its prey. Of course, of course. But when those beliefs involve organizations that have been criticized for their treatment of former members, for their secretive practices, don't you think that's worth discussing? The tension in the studio was now palpable. Crew members exchanged worried glances, and the audience sat in stunned silence as they watched one of Hollywood's biggest stars being openly challenged on national television. Cruise's hands clenched slightly in his lap, his knuckles whitening as he struggled to maintain his composure. Jimmy, I came here tonight as a guest on your show to discuss my work, to entertain your audience. I don't think it's appropriate to use this platform to attack my personal beliefs or the organizations I choose to support. Cruise's voice remained steady, but there was an underlying steel that suggested his patience was wearing thin. Kimmel's smile widened, but it was cold and calculated. Attack? I'm not attacking anything, Tom. I'm just asking questions that I think the public has a right to hear answered. After all, you use your platform to promote these beliefs, so surely you're prepared to discuss them? The audience could feel the electricity in the air as these two powerful men faced off against each other. What had started as a simple promotional interview was rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing television history in the making. Cruise leaned back in his chair, his movie star charm beginning to crack around the edges. You know what, Jimmy? I've been doing this for a long time. I've been a guest on hundreds of shows, and I've always tried to be respectful, to be professional. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's ambush television designed to create controversy at my expense. The host's eyes lit up with what could only be described as malicious glee. He had succeeded in rattling the unflappable Tom Cruise, and he was clearly enjoying every moment of it. Controversy? Tom, I think you're being a little dramatic. These are legitimate questions about legitimate concerns. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be promoting organizations that stop. Cruise's voice cut through the air like a blade, and for the first time in the interview, Kimmel actually looked surprised. The actor's famous intensity was now fully on display, his eyes blazing with a fury that sent a chill through everyone watching. You don't get to sit there and lecture me about what I should or shouldn't support. You don't get to use your show as a platform to spread misinformation and attack people's deeply held beliefs. The studio fell completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented confrontation unfold. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, attempted to backtrack slightly, but the damage was already done. The careful balance between host and guest had been shattered, and there was no going back. The tension reached a breaking point. Everyone in the studio knew they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. The question wasn't whether this confrontation would escalate further. It was how explosive things would get before it was all over. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he had gone too far, but unable to resist pushing even harder, leaned forward with that trademark smirk that had made him so many enemies in Hollywood. Tom, you're getting awfully defensive about some pretty basic questions. I mean, if there's nothing to hide, why are you so upset? The condescension dripping from his voice was unmistakable, and it was clear he was enjoying every moment of Cruise's discomfort. The actor's hands were now visibly shaking with rage, his famous composure completely shattered. Defensive? You want to talk about defensive, Jimmy? How about we talk about your track record of attacking guests who don't share your political views? How about we discuss the way you've used this show to bully people you disagree with? Cruise's voice was rising now, and the studio audience could feel the electricity crackling between these two men. Whoa, 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 Kimmel said, raising his hands in mock surrender, but still wearing that infuriating grin. I think you're confusing asking legitimate questions with bullying. But hey, if you want to change the subject to avoid talking about your, don't you dare. Cruise's interruption was so sharp and forceful that several audience members actually gasped. His eyes were blazing with an intensity that reminded everyone why he'd been one of Hollywood's most bankable stars for decades. You invited me here, under false pretenses. You told my people this was going to be about my movie, about my work. Instead, you're sitting there like some third-rate tabloid journalist trying to ambush me with gotcha questions. The host's facade was beginning to crack. His smile became more forced, more desperate, as he realized he was losing control of the situation. Look, Tom, I don't know why you're getting so worked up. These are questions that a lot of people have, and I think a lot of people. Cruz exploded, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. What people, Jimmy? The people who write your monologue jokes? The people who tell you which celebrities to attack this week? You don't speak for anyone but yourself, and frankly, your opinion means absolutely nothing to me. The audience was now completely silent, transfixed by this unprecedented display of raw emotion from one of Hollywood's most controlled public figures. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away from this career-destroying moment. Kimmel, his face now flushed with anger and embarrassment, abandoned any pretense of professionalism. You know what, Tom? Maybe the questions are uncomfortable because there's some truth to them. Maybe instead of throwing a tantrum like a spoiled child, you should actually address the concerns people have about spoiled child? Cruz's laugh was bitter and dangerous. That's rich coming from someone who's built his entire career on making fun of people more successful than him. You sit behind this desk night after night, taking cheap shots at people who actually create something meaningful, who actually contribute to the world instead of just tearing others down. The host's eyes flashed with genuine fury now. The mask was completely off, and his true nature was on full display. More successful? Tom, you're an actor. You play pretend for a living. Don't act like you're curing cancer or solving world hunger. You make movies about impossible missions while promoting impossible beliefs to millions of impressionable fans. And you make jokes about car accidents and people's personal tragedies. Cruz shot back, his voice dripping with disgust. You mock people going through divorces, struggling with addiction, dealing with mental health issues. You turn human suffering into punchlines for your pathetic audience to laugh at. The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with several people looking toward the exits. This had gone far beyond entertainment into something deeply personal and ugly. The crew members were frantically signaling to each other, trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. That Kimmel's face was now completely red, his carefully constructed television persona crumbling before millions of viewers. At least I'm honest about what I do. I don't pretend to be some kind of spiritual guru while supporting organizations that destroy families and silence critics. I don't use my fame to recruit people into enough. Cruz's roar silenced the entire studio. He was on his feet now, towering over the seated host with an intensity that was genuinely frightening. You have no idea what you're talking about. You sit here in your little bubble, surrounded by yes-men and sycophants, thinking you understand the world because you read some hit pieces written by disgruntled former employees with axes to grind. The host tried to regain control, his voice shaking slightly. Tom, I think you need to calm down. You're proving my point about the volatile nature of volatile. Cruz's laugh was sharp and humorless. You want to see volatile? How about the way you attacked that politician's wife last month? How about the way you ambushed that young actress with questions about her eating disorder? You're a predator, Jimmy. You prey on people's vulnerabilities and call it comedy. The accusations were flying fast and furious now, each one more damaging than the last. Kimmel was visibly sweating, his usual confidence completely shattered. That's not. You're taking things out of context. You never what? Never destroyed someone's career for a few laughs? Never made a teenager cry on national television? Never used your platform to spread lies and misinformation about people who've done nothing but try to entertain your audience? Cruz was relentless now, his famous intensity focused like a laser on the cowering host. The studio was in complete chaos. Producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, while security guards were positioning themselves near the set in case things got physical. The audience was a mix of horrified fascination and genuine fear as they watched one of the most powerful men in Hollywood systematically destroy a late-night television host. Kimmel, his voice barely above a whisper now, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Tom, please, let's just talk about the movie. That's what people want to hear about. Let's get back to, now you want to talk about the movie? Cruz's voice was dangerously quiet, which somehow made it even more terrifying than when he was shouting. After you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to humiliate me in front of millions of people? After you've attacked my beliefs, my character, my entire life? Now you want to pretend like this is just a normal interview? The host's hands were visibly shaking now as he realized the full extent of what he had unleashed. This wasn't just a heated exchange that would be forgotten. By morning, this was a complete destruction of his credibility, his reputation, his entire career, and it was all being broadcast live to millions of viewers. I, I was just doing my job, Kimmel stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. I was just asking the questions that people want answered. I didn't mean for things to get so what? So honest. So real. Cruz's voice was dripping with contempt. This is what happens when you step out of your scripted little world and try to go toe-to-toe with someone who actually has something to say. You can't handle it when someone fights back, can you? The confrontation had reached a point of no return. Everyone in the studio knew that whatever happened next would define both men's careers forever. The question was no longer whether this would end badly. It was just how catastrophic the finale would be. Kimmel, desperate to regain some semblance of control, made the fatal mistake of doubling down on his attacks. His face twisted into an ugly sneer as he leaned forward in his chair, his voice taking on a mocking tone that would seal his fate. You know what, Tom? You're right. I am asking tough questions. And maybe that's exactly what someone in your position needs to hear. Maybe it's time someone held you accountable for the influence you have over vulnerable people. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Cruz's eyes went completely cold, and for a moment, the studio fell into an eerie silence that felt more dangerous than all the shouting that had come before. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any scream could have. Vulnerable people, Cruz repeated slowly, his words dripping with barely contained rage. You want to talk about vulnerable people, Jimmy? Let's talk about the young comedians you've had on this show who were struggling with depression, who came here looking for a break, and you humiliated them for cheap laughs. Let's talk about the way you've mocked people's appearances, their mistakes, their personal tragedies. The host's face went pale as Cruz continued his methodical destruction. You sit there night after night, hiding behind your writers and your cue cards, thinking you're some kind of moral authority. But you're nothing more than a bully with a microphone, and tonight, millions of people are finally seeing who you really are. Kimmel's hands were shaking now as he realized the full magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a heated exchange that would blow over. This was a complete dismantling of his carefully constructed image, broadcast live to his own audience. Tom, I think you're being a little dramatic. We're just having a conversation here. A conversation? Cruz's laugh was sharp and bitter. You call this a conversation? You ambushed me. You attacked my beliefs. You tried to humiliate me in front of millions of people, and now you want to pretend this is just a friendly chat. The actor stood up slowly, his imposing presence casting a shadow over the cowering host. The studio audience was completely transfixed, watching in stunned silence as one of the most powerful men in Hollywood systematically destroyed a late-night television institution. Camera operators were frantically adjusting their shots, knowing they were capturing television history in the making. Jimmy, let me tell you something, Cruz continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with the best directors, the most talented actors, the most creative minds in the industry. I've dedicated my life to entertaining people, to pushing boundaries, to creating experiences that inspire and amaze audiences around the world. He paused, his piercing gaze fixed on the increasingly uncomfortable host. And you? You're a parasite. You contribute nothing. You create nothing. You just tear down people who are actually trying to make a difference in the world. You mock their efforts, you ridicule their beliefs, and you call it entertainment. Kimmel tried desperately to interject, his voice cracking with panic. Now wait just a minute. I've entertained millions of people. I've brought joy to joy. Cruz's interruption was explosive. You call making fun of people's pain joy? You call destroying someone's reputation for a few laughs entertainment? You're delusional if you think what you do brings anything positive to the world. The host was now visibly sweating, his usual smugness replaced by genuine fear. He looked around desperately, as if hoping his producers would somehow save him from this public execution. Tom, please. Let's just calm down and calm down. Cruz's voice rose to a roar that echoed through the studio. You want me to calm down after you've spent the last half hour trying to destroy my reputation? After you've attacked everything I believe in. After you've shown complete disrespect for me, my work, and the millions of people who support what I do." The actor was now towering over the seated host, his famous intensity focused like a weapon. "You know what the real problem is, Jimmy? You're jealous. You're jealous that I've actually accomplished something meaningful with my life. You're jealous that people respect me, that I've earned my place in this industry through hard work and dedication, not by tearing others down." The studio fell into complete silence except for the low hum of the cameras. Even the crew members had stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented confrontation unfold. Kimmel's face was now completely red, a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and genuine fear. "You sit behind this desk every night." Cruz continued relentlessly, making jokes about people who are actually out there creating, building, inspiring. "You're like a vulture, feeding off the success and failures of others because you don't have the talent or the courage to create anything meaningful yourself." The host made one last desperate attempt to fight back, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "At least I don't brainwash people into believing in fairy tales. At least I don't use my fame to recruit people into—" "Stop!" Cruz's roar cut through the air like a gunshot. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're spouting lies and propaganda because you're too lazy to actually research the truth. You're a coward and a fraud, and tonight everyone can see it." The confrontation had reached its absolute peak. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of defeat and humiliation. The studio audience was completely silent, shocked by the brutality of what they were witnessing. Cruz stood there for a moment, his chest heaving with emotion, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. Then, slowly, he reached up and unclipped his microphone, letting it fall to the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the stunned studio. "You know what, Jimmy?" he said, his voice now calm but filled with absolute contempt. "I came here tonight to promote my movie, to talk about the incredible work my team has done, to share something positive with your audience. But instead, you've shown everyone exactly what kind of person you really are." He straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, addressing the millions of viewers watching at home. "To everyone watching tonight, I want you to know that this is not what entertainment should be. This is not what respectful discourse looks like. This is what happens when someone uses their platform to spread hatred and division instead of bringing people together." Then he turned back to the host, who was still sitting in stunned silence, his career crumbling around him in real time. "As for you, Jimmy, I hope you're proud of yourself. You've destroyed any credibility you had left, and you've shown the world who you really are. I hope it was worth it." Without another word, Tom Cruise turned and walked away from the interview area, his footsteps echoing through the deathly quiet studio. The cameras followed him as he made his way toward the exit, his posture straight and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. The studio audience remained frozen in their seats, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in stunned silence. Kimmel sat behind his desk like a broken man, his face pale and his hands shaking as he stared at the empty chair where his guest had been sitting just moments before A.S. Cruz reached the studio exit. He paused for just a moment and looked back at the carnage he was leaving behind. Then, without a word, he pushed through the doors and disappeared into the night, leaving behind one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. The cameras lingered on Kimmel's devastated face for a few more seconds before finally cutting to commercial, but the damage was already done. In the span of 30 minutes, one of Hollywood's biggest stars had completely destroyed a late-night television host, and millions of viewers had witnessed every brutal moment of it. The explosive confrontation between Tom Cruise and Jimmy Kimmel had come to its devastating conclusion, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would be talked about for years to come. The question now wasn't whether this would impact both men's careers. It was how they would ever recover from this unprecedented public disaster.